The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers and clattered onto the concrete floor of my garage. That's when I heard it. My 12-year-old daughter Beth's voice cutting through the thin walls like a rusty blade through flesh. "Why don't you just leave him already, Mom? Scott treats you like a queen. Dad's just there." I froze under the chassis of Mrs. Henderson's ancient Buick, oil dripping onto my forehead like tears I refused to shed. If you're going to get stabbed in the heart, I thought, it may as well be with the truth delivered by your own kid. My name is Jason Miller, and I fix things for a living. Cars, mostly. 37 years old, hands permanently stained with motor oil, back perpetually aching from crawling under vehicles that should have been scrapped a decade ago. I own Miller's Auto Repair on the edge of Millbrook, a post-industrial town where the American dream came to die and nobody bothered to bury the corpse. Through the wall, I could hear my wife Laura's voice, lower, but just as cutting. "Beth, you don't understand adult relationships. Your father and I are complicated." Complicated. That's what 15 years of marriage had become. Not broken, not failed, just complicated, like a German engine manual written in Sanskrit. I slid out from under the Buick and wiped my hands on a rag that had seen better decades. The garage was my sanctuary, filled with the honest smell of motor oil and the satisfying clank of metal on metal. Here, problems had solutions. A busted transmission could be rebuilt. A seized engine could be freed. A marriage, apparently, could not. The conversation in the kitchen continued, and I found myself creeping closer to the door like some pathetic spy in my own home. "Scott understands me," Laura was saying. "He listens when I talk about work. He remembers things that matter to me." Scott. Scott fucking Peterson. Not the serial killer, though the jury was still out on that one. Real estate agent, 40 years old, drove a silver Audi that probably cost more than I made in a year. Perfect teeth, perfect hair, perfect ability to make my wife forget she had a husband. "When's the last time Dad took you somewhere nice?" Beth asked, and I could hear the disdain in her voice. When had my own daughter started looking at me like I was a stranger who'd overstayed his welcome? "Your father works hard," Laura said, but even she didn't sound convinced. "He provides for us." Provides, like I was some kind of vending machine that dispensed mortgage payments and grocery money. Insert 40 hours of labor, receive basic survival necessities. I'd known about Scott for 3 months now. Known about the late nights at work conferences. Known about the new lingerie that never made an appearance in our bedroom. Known about the way Laura's phone was suddenly password protected and face down on every surface. But hearing my daughter, my own flesh and blood, casually dismiss me as a placeholder in my wife's life, that was a fresh kind of hell. The kitchen door opened, and Laura appeared in her corporate armor, tailored blazer, pencil skirt, heels that clicked against the concrete like a countdown timer. She worked in HR for Morrison Industries, the last major employer in Millbrook. She made good money, had good benefits, and apparently had a good side piece to go with it all. "Jason," she said, not quite meeting my eyes, "I'm heading to the office early. Board meeting today." Board meeting. Right. The kind that happened in hotel rooms with Egyptian cotton sheets and complimentary champagne. "Sure thing," I said, forcing a smile. "I'll pick up the girls from school." She nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Jason?" Mrs. Grady called. "She said someone was in our driveway last night around midnight. Might want to check if anything's missing." Mrs. Grady, our 70-something neighbor who treated surveillance like an Olympic sport. She had ring cameras pointed at every conceivable angle and the social awareness of a CIA operative. If someone had been in our driveway at midnight, she'd have footage, timestamps, and probably a full psychological profile. "I'll look into it," I said. After Laura left, I stood in my garage for a long moment, listening to the tick of cooling engines and the distant hum of traffic on Route 9. This was my kingdom, a modest realm of hydraulic lifts, tool chests, and the accumulated wisdom of 2 decades spent making broken things whole again. But some things, I was learning, couldn't be fixed with the right wrench and enough elbow grease. I walked back into the house, where Beth and her 9-year-old sister Janie were getting ready for school. Beth had Laura's sharp features and my stubborn streak, a combination that promised trouble in the coming years. Janie was softer, quieter, still young enough to hug me without embarrassment. "Dad," Janie said, looking up from her cereal bowl, "are you and Mom getting divorced?" The question hit me like a backfire from a poorly tuned engine, sudden, jarring, and impossible to ignore. "Why would you ask that, sweetheart?" "Because Tommy's parents got divorced, and his mom started staying out late, and his dad started sleeping in the garage." I glanced toward the couch in my office, where I'd been spending most nights lately. Kids notice everything, especially the things you desperately hope they won't. "Your mom and I are just going through a rough patch," I said, the lie tasting like motor oil in my mouth. "Sometimes adults need space to figure things out." Beth snorted. "Space, right." After I dropped the girls at school, I drove back through downtown Millbrook. Main Street looked like a mouth with half its teeth knocked out, empty storefronts, faded signs, and the kind of resignation that settles over a place when the world moves on without it. The Morrison Industries plant still employed about half the town, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time before they moved operations somewhere cheaper. I parked outside the Rusty Nail, the local dive bar that served as Millbrook's unofficial town hall. At 10 in the morning, it was closed, but I could see Eddie Kowalski inside, setting up for the day. Eddie had been tending bar here for 15 years, and he knew everyone's business better than they knew it themselves. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "Your wife's car was at the Sleepy Inn Motel last night. Room 237. Thought you should know. A friend." I stared at the screen until the words blurred together. The Sleepy Inn was a roach-infested dump on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that rented rooms by the hour and didn't ask questions about why you needed them. Room 237. I drove there without conscious thought, my truck navigating the familiar streets, while my mind reeled. The Sleepy Inn squatted beside Route 9 like a guilty secret, its neon sign flickering even in broad daylight. The parking lot was mostly empty, except for a few cars that looked like they'd been abandoned rather than parked. The desk clerk was a thin man with suspicious eyes and the pallor of someone who'd spent too many years in artificial light. He looked me up and down, taking in my work clothes and the oil stains that marked me as blue collar. "Help you?" "Room 237, I said. "Last night. I need to know who was registered." He laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. "You a cop?" "I'm a husband." Something in my voice must have convinced him, because his expression softened slightly. "Look, man, I can't give out guest information, but..." He glanced around the empty lobby. "Hypothetically, if someone paid cash for that room around 9 p.m. and left around midnight, and if they happened to drive a silver Audi, well, hypothetically, that's not really guest information, is it? Silver Audi, Scott's car." I thanked the clerk and walked back to my truck on unsteady legs. In the space of 12 hours, my marriage had gone from complicated to completely fucked, and I was apparently the last person in Millbrook to get the memo. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Laura. "Working late tonight, don't wait up." I laughed out loud, a sound that scared a crow off the motel's roof. Working late. At the Sleepy Inn Motel, presumably, where the business was conducted horizontally and the only thing being worked was my wife's conscience. That's when I made my first mistake, or my first smart decision, depending on how you looked at it. I drove to Peterson Realty, Scott's office in the trendy part of downtown that the city council had tried to gentrify with mixed results. His silver Audi was parked in front, pristine and smug like its owner. I had a bag of sugar in my truck, leftover from when I'd helped Mrs. Henderson make candy for her church fundraiser. Sugar in a gas tank was mostly an urban legend, but it would gum up the fuel filter something fierce. I also had a knife for cutting hoses and a valve stem tool for deflating tires. Scott's car was parked under a streetlight, visible from the main road. Anyone could see me. Mrs. Grady would have had a field day. I did it anyway. Sugar in the tank, 4 flat tires, a note under the windshield wiper. Karma's a bitch, and so is your girlfriend's husband. I was back in my garage within 20 minutes, hands shaking with adrenaline and something that might have been joy. For the first time in months, I felt like I'd actually done something instead of just letting life happen to me. That feeling lasted exactly until the next morning, when Laura stormed into my garage with her phone in her hand and murder in her eyes. "You vandalized Scott's car," she said. Not a question. "Did I?" "Mrs. Grady sent me the footage, Jason. Ring camera, clear as day." "Of course she did. Mrs. Grady probably had the video uploaded to YouTube before I'd even made it home." "Prove it was me," I said. Laura's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "You left a note, you idiot. In your handwriting." "Fair point." "You want to play games?" Laura continued. "Fine. But I'm calling my lawyer. Harassment, vandalism, stalking, take your pick. Keep this up, and you'll be lucky to see the girls on weekends." She turned to leave, then paused at the garage door. "And Jason?" "Everyone knows. The whole town is talking about how pathetic you are. The sad husband who can't keep his wife happy. You think vandalizing cars makes you look tough? It makes you look desperate." After she left, I sat on my workbench and stared at the concrete floor. She was right, of course. The whole town probably was talking. In a place like Millbrook, a cheating scandal was better than cable television. But here's the thing about being the town laughingstock. Once you're already at the bottom, you've got nothing left to lose. And that, as I was about to learn, could be a very dangerous thing indeed. The rusty nail smelled like stale beer and broken dreams, which made it the perfect place to drink away what remained of my dignity. It was Tuesday night, which meant the usual crowd. Eddie behind the bar, a handful of Morrison Industries workers drowning their shift in Budweiser, and me, nursing a whiskey that tasted like regret. "Heard about your little adventure," Eddie said, polishing a glass that had seen better decades. "Mrs. Grady's been showing that video to anyone with eyes." "Great," I muttered. "Always wanted to be famous." "Could be worse," said a voice behind me. "Could be married to my ex-wife." I turned to see Diana Walsh sliding onto the bar stool next to mine. Diana ran the orthodontist office on Maple Street, had a laugh like wind chimes, and possessed the rare ability to make conversation without immediately asking about my marital problems. We'd known each other since high school, but had only started talking regularly when she'd brought her car to my shop 6 months ago. "Rough week?" she asked. "Rough life," I replied. "But who's counting?" Diana ordered a wine that Eddie probably had to dust off, then gave me a look that was equal parts sympathy and amusement. "You know, Jason, for what it's worth, most people think Scott Peterson is a slimy piece of shit. Most people aren't married to him. Neither are you. Fair point. The thing is," Diana continued, "Laura's been talking, to anyone who will listen, about your performance issues." I nearly choked on my whiskey. "My what?" Her words, not mine. Apparently, she's been sharing intimate details with her book club, and her yoga class, and the ladies at Perfect Nails. Perfect Nails was the gossip headquarters of Millbrook, a place where secrets went to die public deaths. If Laura had been discussing our bedroom problems there, every woman in town knew by Thursday. "Jesus Christ," I said. "It gets worse," Diana said gently. "She's also been telling people you're emotionally abusive. Controlling, that she's afraid of what you might do if she tries to leave." The whiskey turned to acid in my stomach. "That's not... I've never laid a hand on her." "I know that. Most people with half a brain know that. But Laura's smart, Jason. She's building a narrative. Poor, trapped wife, dangerous husband, heroic lover who makes her feel safe." I stared at my reflection in the bar mirror. Stubbled face, tired eyes, the look of a man who'd been sucker-punched by his own life. "Why are you telling me this?" Diana was quiet for a moment, swirling wine in her glass. "Because someone should. And because..." She paused. "Because Laura wasn't always faithful to Scott either." That got my attention. "What do you mean?" "I mean Scott's the current flavor, not the first. There was someone before him, someone before that. You've been the steady paycheck while she's been sampling the menu." The bar suddenly felt too small, too hot. like the walls were closing in. How do you know all this? Small town, Jason. People talk and I listen. I finished my whiskey and signaled Eddie for another. The alcohol wasn't helping, but it wasn't hurting either, and right now that was the best I could hope for. There's something else, Diana said. About Scott. Let me guess. He's actually a wonderful guy who's just misunderstood? He's broke. That stopped me cold. What? Peterson Realty is hemorrhaging money, has been for 2 years. The fancy car, the expensive suits, it's all financed to the hilt. He's been using client escrow accounts to cover operating expenses. That's illegal. Very. And if someone were to tip off the state real estate commission? I looked at Diana with new respect. How do you know all this? His accountant is my patient. Braces for his teenage daughter. Amazing what people tell you when your hands are in their mouth. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the Morrison Industries crowd argue about the upcoming layoffs. Outside, Millbrook settled into its evening routine, streetlights flickering on, teenagers congregating at the Dairy Queen, the slow dance of a town trying to convince itself it still mattered. I should probably head home, I said eventually. To what? An empty house and a couch that smells like motor oil? She had a point. Laura was working late again, and the girls were at their grandmother's house for the week, a convenient arrangement that gave Laura more time for her extracurricular activities. Come on, Diana said, finishing her wine. I'll buy you dinner. Somewhere that doesn't serve food from a heat lamp. We ended up at Rosario's, the Italian place that had somehow survived Millbrook's economic apocalypse by serving portions large enough to feed a family of 4 and wine cheap enough to make you forget why you needed it. Diana was easy to talk to, the kind of person who listened without judgment and laughed at the right moments. You know what the worst part is? I said, halfway through a plate of spaghetti that could have fed a small village. It's not even the cheating. It's the lying. The elaborate stories, the fake concern, the way she looks me in the eye and tells me she loves me while she's got another man's number saved in her phone under Jim Buddy. Jim Buddy? That's what she calls Scott in her contacts. I saw it when she left her phone on the counter last week. Diana nearly choked on her wine. That's actually kind of hilarious. Hilarious, right? No, I mean it. Think about it. She's having this grand affair, this epic romance that's going to justify blowing up her marriage, and she's got the guy listed as Gym Buddy, like he's some random personal trainer she texts about protein shakes. When she put it like that, it was pretty funny, in a pathetic, soul-crushing kind of way. The thing is, I said, I don't even know if I want to save the marriage anymore. I just want to stop feeling like the world's biggest sucker. So don't be one. Easier said than done. Diana leaned forward, her expression serious. Jason, you're a good guy. Too good, maybe. You've been playing defense for months while Laura runs up the score. Maybe it's time to go on offense. What do you mean? I mean, stop letting her control the narrative. Stop being the victim in your own story. We talked until the restaurant started stacking chairs on tables around us. Diana was smart, funny, and, unlike my wife, seemed to actually enjoy my company. When she laughed at my jokes, it didn't feel like charity. I should drive you home, I said as we walked to the parking lot. I'm 3 blocks away, she replied. But thanks for dinner. And Jason? Yeah? Whatever you decide to do about Laura, just remember, revenge is a dish best served with a side of plausible deniability. I watched her walk away, heels clicking on the sidewalk, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not hope that my marriage could be saved, that ship had sailed, hit an iceberg, and was currently resting on the ocean floor. But hope that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to go down with it. The next morning, I was under the hood of a Ford pickup when my phone rang. Unknown number. Miller's Auto. Is this Jason Miller? The voice was female, nervous. Speaking. This is Jennifer Walsh. I clean houses in town. I think we need to talk. Jennifer Walsh. I knew the name but couldn't place the face. About what? About your wife. And Scott Peterson. And some things you probably need to know. We agreed to meet at the Dairy Queen after I closed the shop. Jennifer turned out to be a thin woman in her 40s, with the kind of tired eyes that came from seeing too much of other people's private business. She ordered a coffee and sat across from me in a booth that had probably been old when I was in high school. "I clean houses," she began, "including Scott Peterson's, and I've been cleaning for Laura's friend Jenny Morrison for 3 years. Jenny Morrison. Laura's best friend since college, married to a Morrison Industries executive, lived in the fancy part of town where the lawns were always perfect and the secrets were always ugly. "Okay," I said, not sure where this was going. "Last week I was cleaning Jenny's house when she had Laura over for coffee. They were talking about you, about the situation." "What kind of situation?" Jennifer looked uncomfortable. Jenny was telling Laura how to play things, how to make you look bad in court, how to document things that would make you seem dangerous. My blood went cold. What kind of things? Angry texts, confrontations, anything that could be twisted to look like abuse or stalking. Jennifer paused. Jenny said she'd done it before, when her sister got divorced. Said the key was to make the husband look unstable while the wife looked like a victim. "Jenny Morrison coached my wife on how to frame me?" "More than that. She's been planning this whole thing. The affair with Scott, the divorce strategy, even where Laura should live afterward. Jenny's got it all mapped out." I sat back in the booth, my mind reeling. "Why are you telling me this?" Jennifer's expression hardened. "Because Jenny Morrison is a bitch who treats me like furniture. She talks about her schemes like I'm not even there, then complains when I don't dust her precious knickknacks exactly right. And because..." She paused. "Because what they're planning to do to you isn't right." "What exactly are they planning?" "Laura's going to provoke you into doing something stupid, something public. Then she'll use it as evidence that you're unstable and dangerous. Jenny's already got a lawyer picked out, a custody evaluator who owes her husband favors, even a therapist who'll testify about your anger issues." I felt like I was drowning in clear water, able to see the surface, but unable to reach it. "How long have they been planning this?" "Months, since before the thing with Scott started. Jenny said Laura needed an exit strategy, and Scott was just the excuse." After Jennifer left, I sat in my truck in the Dairy Queen parking lot, watching teenagers flirt over ice cream and trying to process what I'd learned. My wife hadn't just cheated on me, she'd orchestrated an elaborate campaign to destroy me. With the help of her best friend, she'd turned our marriage into a chess game where I didn't even know I was playing. But here's the thing about chess. Once you know the other player's strategy, you can start planning your own moves. I drove home to our empty house, poured myself a whiskey, and started making a list. Not a revenge list. I wasn't that far gone yet. Just a simple inventory of facts, evidence, and possibilities. By the time I finished, I was smiling for the first time in weeks. If Laura wanted to play games, I was ready to show her what a real player looked like. The Morrison Industries annual picnic was Millbrook's version of high society, a chance for the town's elite to pretend they were still living in the 1950s when the plant employed half the county and the future looked bright. It was held every year at Riverside Park, complete with 3-legged races, a dunk tank, and enough forced corporate cheer to make a motivational speaker nauseous. Laura loved it. She got to wear her summer dress, make small talk with the executives' wives, and play the role of the successful career woman with the perfect family. This year, she'd insisted we all attend together, one last performance before the curtain fell on our marriage. I agreed, of course. I had my own reasons for wanting to be there. "Remember to smile," Laura told me as we walked across the park's brown grass, "and try not to talk about work. Nobody wants to hear about transmissions at a social event." Beth and Janie ran ahead toward the games, leaving Laura and me to navigate the minefield of Millbrook's social hierarchy. The Morrison Industries executives clustered around the beer tent like generals planning a campaign, their wives forming a secondary circle of gossip and judgment. "Jason!" a voice boomed across the park. "How's business?" Tom Morrison, Jenny's husband, and one of the plant's senior managers, approached with a beer in one hand and a forced smile on his face. He was the kind of man who measured success in square footage and horsepower. the kind who'd probably never changed his own oil but felt qualified to give advice about cars. "Can't complain," I replied. "Keeping busy." "That's the spirit. You know, if you ever want to expand, move into commercial fleet maintenance, I might be able to throw some work your way." The offer was generous and completely hollow, the kind of thing people said at company picnics when they wanted to sound important. But I smiled and thanked him anyway, playing my part in the elaborate theater of small-town networking. "Where's Jenny?" Laura asked, scanning the crowd. "Over by the dessert table, holding court as usual," Tom replied. "You know how she is at these things." I did indeed know how Jenny Morrison was at these things. She was the unofficial social coordinator of Millbrook's upper crust, the woman who decided which charity events were worth attending and which families were worth knowing. She was also, as I'd recently learned, my wife's strategic advisor in the art of marital warfare. "I'm going to grab a beer," I told Laura. "Want anything?" "White wine, if they have it." They didn't, of course. The Morrison Industries picnic ran on beer, soda, and the kind of optimism that came from pretending everything was fine, while the company slowly bled jobs to Mexico. But I got Laura a Sprite and myself a Budweiser, then made my way toward the dessert table where Jenny Morrison was indeed holding court. Jenny was a handsome woman in her early 40s, the kind of person who'd been popular in high school and had never quite gotten over it. She had perfect hair, perfect makeup, and the perfect ability to make cutting remarks sound like compliments. "Jason," she said as I approached. "How lovely to see you." "Laura said you've been working so hard lately." "Someone has to pay the bills," I replied. "Of course. Though I imagine it must be difficult with everything that's been going on." The comment was delivered with surgical precision, sympathetic enough to sound caring, vague enough to maintain plausible deniability. The women around her leaned in slightly, sensing blood in the water. "Everything's fine," I said. "Just the usual ups and downs." "Well, if you ever need someone to talk to, you know Tom and I are always here for you both." I thanked her and moved away, but not before I'd accomplished what I'd come for. In the pocket of my jeans was a small digital recorder, the kind private investigators used for surveillance work. I'd bought it online for $39 and had been carrying it everywhere for the past week, hoping for exactly this kind of opportunity. Jenny Morrison loved to talk, especially about other people's problems, and in a town like Millbrook, other people's problems were the most valuable currency around. The picnic continued its predictable course. The executives made speeches about teamwork and dedication, while everyone pretended not to notice the rumors about upcoming layoffs. The wives discussed school fundraisers and home renovations, while carefully avoiding any mention of the affairs, addictions, and financial troubles that were common knowledge but never acknowledged in polite company. I watched it all with new eyes, seeing the performance for what it was, an elaborate dance where everyone knew the steps, but nobody wanted to admit they were dancing. Around 4 o'clock, I noticed Scott Peterson had arrived. He moved through the crowd like a shark in a swimming pool, all perfect teeth and predatory charm. He worked the executives, flattered the wives, and made sure everyone knew about his latest real estate deals. When he reached Laura, the temperature of their interaction was carefully calibrated. Friendly but not too friendly, familiar but not inappropriate. They'd clearly practiced this routine. "Scott," I said, appearing beside them with the sudden materialization of a bad rash. "Good to see you." His smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. "Jason, great turnout today." "Absolutely. Though I heard business has been tough lately, real estate market and all." "Oh, you know how it is. Ups and downs, but I'm optimistic about the future." "That's good to hear, especially with all those rumors about financial troubles." The smile became more forced. "Rumors? You know how people talk in a small town." "Probably nothing to worry about." Laura was giving me a look that could have melted steel, but I ignored her. Scott excused himself a few minutes later, claiming he needed to speak with someone about a listing. "What the hell was that about?" Laura hissed once he was gone. "Just making conversation?" "You were being an asshole." "Was I? I thought I was being friendly." She stormed off toward the ladies' room, leaving me alone by the beer tent. That's when Diana appeared at my elbow, looking amused. Subtle, she said. I thought so. How's the information gathering going? I patted the recorder in my pocket. Better than expected. Diana had become my unofficial advisor in what she'd started calling Operation Dignity Recovery. She had a devious mind hidden behind her professional demeanor, and she seemed to take genuine pleasure in helping me level the playing field. Jenny Morrison's been busy, Diana continued. Word is she's been making calls to lawyers, asking about custody procedures. On Laura's behalf? That would be my guess. I watched Jenny across the park, surrounded by her usual circle of admirers. She was animated, gesturing with her hands, probably sharing some delicious piece of gossip about someone's personal tragedy. The recorder in my pocket felt warm against my leg. Want to hear something interesting? Diana asked. Always. I was talking to Carol Henderson, the bank manager. Apparently Scott Peterson's been bouncing checks all over town. His business account is overdrawn, and he's behind on his office rent. This was news, good news from my perspective. How behind? 3 months. His landlord's already started eviction proceedings. I felt something that might have been joy spreading through my chest. Scott Peterson, the man who was stealing my wife with his success and sophistication, was apparently broke and facing eviction. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. The picnic wound down as the sun began to set. Families packed up their blankets and coolers, children were retrieved from various games and activities, and the Morrison Industries executives retreated to the beer tent for the kind of serious drinking that followed corporate social events. I found Laura by the car, looking tired and irritated. Ready to go? I asked. More than ready. The drive home was quiet, the girls exhausted from a day of running around in the heat. But I could feel Laura's anger radiating from the passenger seat like heat from an engine block. We need to talk, she said, once we'd gotten the girls settled at home. Okay. We went out to the back porch, where the evening air carried the scent of barbecue smoke and the distant sound of teenagers racing cars on Route 9. Laura sat in the wicker chair that had been her mother's, while I leaned against the railing. I know what you're doing, she said. What am I doing? You're trying to embarrass me. Embarrass Scott. Making snide comments, asking pointed questions. I was just making conversation. Bullshit. She stood up, pacing the small porch like a caged animal. You think you're being clever, but you're just making yourself look pathetic. Everyone can see what you're doing. And what exactly am I doing? You're the bitter husband who can't let go. The sad man who's trying to drag everyone else down because his own life is falling apart. I absorbed this character assessment with the same detached interest I might show a particularly creative insult. Is that what Jenny told you to say? Laura stopped pacing. What? Jenny Morrison. Is this part of the strategy you two have been working on? For just a moment, Laura's mask slipped. I saw confusion, then fear, then anger flash across her face in rapid succession. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. She studied my face, trying to read something there. Jason, what's gotten into you lately? You're acting different. Different how? I don't know, confident maybe, like you know something I don't. I smiled, the kind of expression that probably looked more dangerous than friendly. Maybe I do. That night, after Laura had gone to bed, I sat in my garage and listened to the recording from the picnic. Most of it was useless. Background noise, fragments of conversation, the general chaos of a social event. But there were a few gems, including a 10-minute conversation between Jenny Morrison and Carol Henderson about Laura's situation and the best strategies for protecting her assets during a divorce. It was exactly the kind of evidence I'd been hoping for. I made copies of the recording, stored the originals in a safety deposit box, and began planning my next move. Laura and Jenny thought they were playing chess while I stumbled around the board like a confused pawn. They were about to learn that pawns, when they reach the other end of the board, can become very dangerous pieces indeed. The war for my dignity was just beginning, and I intended to win it. The call came on a Thursday morning while I was rebuilding the engine on Mrs. Patterson's ancient Honda. My hands were covered in grease, and I almost didn't answer the phone, but something made me reach for it with my elbow. Miller's auto. Jason, it's Diana. You need to get down to Peterson Realty. Now. Why? What's happening? Just get down here and bring a camera. I wiped my hands on a rag and drove the 6 blocks to downtown, where a small crowd had gathered outside Scott's office. A sheriff's deputy was posting notices on the door, while Scott stood on the sidewalk, gesticulating wildly at a man in a cheap suit who was clearly not impressed by the performance. I parked across the street and walked over to where Diana was standing with a few other onlookers. Eviction, she said quietly. 3 months behind on rent, and the landlord finally pulled the trigger. Scott was arguing with the deputy, his voice carrying across the street. This is a mistake. I have a check. The money's in escrow, it just needs to clear. The man in the cheap suit, presumably the landlord, shook his head. You've been saying that for 3 months, Scott. I'm done waiting. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Not for any particular reason, just because it seemed like the kind of moment that might be useful later. Scott Peterson, the man who'd stolen my wife with his success and sophistication, being evicted from his office like a deadbeat tenant. The crowd was small, but attentive. In a town like Millbrook, public humiliation was better than cable television. I recognized most of the faces: shop owners, retirees, the kind of people who had nothing better to do on a Thursday morning than watch their neighbors' lives fall apart. Is that Jason Miller? Someone said behind me. I turned to see Betty Kowalski, Eddie's wife and the town's unofficial news director. She had the kind of smile that suggested she was enjoying the show. Hello, Betty. Terrible thing, isn't it? A successful businessman like Scott reduced to this. Terrible, I agreed, still recording. Scott had moved from argument to pleading, his voice taking on a desperate edge. Look, I've got deals closing next week. Big commissions, I just need a few more days. The landlord was unmoved. You've got until 5 p.m. to remove your personal belongings. After that, everything gets donated to charity. That's when Scott noticed me. His eyes locked onto my phone, and his face went through several interesting color changes. What the hell are you doing? He demanded, crossing the street toward me. Documenting current events, I replied. Turn that fucking thing off. It's a public street, Scott. First Amendment and all that. He reached for my phone, but I stepped back. The crowd was watching now, sensing drama. You think this is funny? Scott's voice was rising. You think my problems are some kind of joke? I think your problems are your problems, I said. I'm just an interested observer. Interested observer. Right. He was close enough now that I could smell his cologne, expensive stuff that probably cost more than I made in a week. You're loving this, aren't you? Watching everything fall apart. I'm not sure what you mean. Bullshit. You've been spreading rumors about my business, haven't you? Trying to sabotage my reputation. The accusation was loud enough for the crowd to hear, and I saw several people pull out their own phones. Scott Peterson publicly accusing Jason Miller of sabotage was the kind of content that would be all over Facebook within an hour. I haven't spread any rumors, I said calmly. I don't need to. The truth speaks for itself. That's when Scott made his mistake. He grabbed for my phone again, more aggressively this time, and when I pulled back, he shoved me. It wasn't a hard shove, more like an angry push, but it was enough. Assault in front of witnesses, including a sheriff's deputy who was now walking over to see what the commotion was about. Gentlemen, the deputy said, is there a problem here? This asshole's been harassing me, Scott said, pointing at me like I was a particularly offensive piece of roadkill. Is that true? The deputy asked me. I was recording a public event from a public sidewalk, I replied. Mr. Peterson became agitated and put his hands on me. The deputy looked around at the crowd, several of whom nodded in confirmation. Mr. Peterson, I'm going to need you to calm down and step back. Scott's face went red. Are you kidding me? He's been stalking me, spreading lies about my business, and you're taking his side? I'm not taking anyone's side. I'm asking you to step back and lower your voice. But Scott was past the point of rational thought. This is bullshit. Complete bullshit. I'm being destroyed by lies and rumors, and nobody gives a damn about the truth. He stormed off toward his car, leaving the deputy, the crowd, and me standing on the sidewalk. The whole confrontation had lasted maybe 5 minutes, but I knew it would be the talk of the town within hours. "You okay?" the deputy asked me. "Fine, thanks. Might want to avoid Mr. Peterson for a while. He seems pretty wound up." I agreed that avoidance was probably wise, then drove back to my shop. But I couldn't concentrate on the Honda's engine. My mind kept replaying the scene outside Peterson Realty, the look of desperation in Scott's eyes, the way he'd lost control in front of half the town. My phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "Holy shit! Did you see that?" I texted back, "I recorded it. Send me a copy. This is better than reality TV." I was uploading the video when another text came in, this one from Laura. "We need to talk. Now." She was waiting for me when I got home, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. Her face was flushed, her hair slightly disheveled, and she had the look of someone who'd been crying recently. "What did you do?" she demanded. "When?" "Don't play dumb, Jason." "Scott called me. He said you were at his office, recording him, provoking him." "I was recording a public eviction. Scott provoked himself." "Bullshit." She slammed her hand on the kitchen counter. "You've been planning this, haven't you? Spreading rumors, sabotaging his business, waiting for him to fall apart so you could be there with your camera." I sat down at the kitchen table and looked at my wife. Really looked at her. She was still beautiful, still the woman I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago. But there was something different in her eyes now, something desperate and cornered. "Laura," I said gently, "Scott's business problems have nothing to do with me. He's been bouncing checks all over town, he's 3 months behind on rent, and he's apparently been dipping into client escrow accounts. Those aren't rumors. Those are facts." "How do you know about the escrow accounts?" "Because in a town this size, everybody knows everything. The only person who didn't know Scott was broke was you." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her mind working, trying to process this new information. "That's not—" "He said he was having a temporary cash flow problem. A few deals that got delayed. Laura, the man's been living on credit cards and borrowed time for months. His office just got padlocked. What part of that sounds temporary to you?" She sat down across from me, suddenly looking very small and very tired. "But he said, he promised—" "He promised what?" "That we'd be okay. That he could take care of me and the girls. That money wouldn't be a problem." And there it was, the real reason Laura had been so eager to trade up from her blue-collar husband to her white-collar lover. Scott Peterson hadn't just been offering romance and excitement. He'd been promising financial security, a step up the social ladder, a better life. Except it had all been bullshit. "Laura," I said, "what exactly did Scott tell you about his finances?" She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "He said he was making 6 figures, that he had investments, savings accounts, a retirement plan. He showed me bank statements. Fake? I don't know. Maybe. I didn't look too closely. Of course she hadn't. She'd wanted to believe, so she'd believed. It was easier than facing the reality that her escape plan was built on quicksand. "There's something else," she said. "Jenny thinks you've been investigating Scott, digging into his background, his finances. Jenny thinks a lot of things." "Have you?" I considered lying, but what was the point? I've been asking questions, listening to answers. It's amazing what people will tell you if you just pay attention. Laura's face crumpled. "Oh God, what have I done?" It was a good question. What had she done? She'd blown up our marriage for a man who turned out to be a fraud. She'd humiliated me in front of the entire town for someone who couldn't even pay his rent. She'd risked her children's stability for a fantasy that was already evaporating. "The question isn't what you've done," I said. "It's what you're going to do next." She looked up at me, and for a moment I saw the woman I'd married, vulnerable, uncertain, human. "I don't know," she said. "I honestly don't know." That night, I sat in my garage and thought about the conversation. Laura was finally seeing Scott Peterson for what he really was, and the revelation was destroying her. Part of me felt sorry for her, part of me felt vindicated, and part of me felt something darker, a satisfaction that came from watching the people who'd humiliated me get their comeuppance. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Saw the video. Scott's losing it. Thought you should know he's been asking around about you, asking questions. I stared at the message, trying to figure out who might have sent it. Then another text arrived. Be careful. He's desperate, and desperate people do stupid things. I deleted both messages and went back to thinking. Scott Peterson was broke, evicted, and publicly humiliated. His relationship with Laura was probably over, and his reputation in town was shot. He had nothing left to lose, which made him dangerous. But here's the thing about dangerous men. They usually make mistakes, and when they do, smart men are ready to take advantage of them. I was getting very good at being smart. The Millbrook Community Center hadn't seen this much excitement since the great bingo scandal of 2018. It was the annual Founders' Day celebration, and half the town had turned out for the barbecue, live music, and the kind of forced community spirit that made small-town life both charming and suffocating. I hadn't planned to attend. After the confrontation outside Peterson Realty and the subsequent explosion of gossip, I'd been content to lay low and let the drama play out without me. But Diana had convinced me otherwise. You can't hide forever, she'd said. Besides, this is your chance to control the narrative. Show everyone that you're not the bitter, vindictive husband Laura's been painting you as. So here I was, manning the Miller's auto repair booth, handing out business cards and making small talk with people who'd been whispering about my personal life for months. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was promoting my business at the same event where my marriage had become the town's favorite entertainment. The girls were with me, Beth reluctantly helping with the booth while Janie ran around with her friends. Laura was notably absent, claiming she had work to catch up on. In reality, I suspected she was avoiding the public spectacle that our lives had become. Dad, Beth said, looking up from the stack of business cards she'd been organizing, why is everyone staring at us? Because people like drama, I replied, and right now, we're the most dramatic family in Millbrook. That's stupid. Yes, it is. But it's also temporary. Eventually someone else will do something scandalous, and everyone will forget about us. She seemed satisfied with this explanation and went back to arranging the promotional materials. At 12, Beth was old enough to sense that something was wrong, but young enough to accept simple explanations. I envied her that luxury. Around noon, I noticed a commotion near the main stage. Scott Peterson had arrived, and he was clearly drunk. Not falling down drunk, but the kind of drunk where your voice gets too loud and your judgment goes out the window. He was arguing with someone I didn't recognize, a middle-aged man in a suit who looked distinctly uncomfortable. That's his lawyer, Diana said, appearing at my elbow with a plate of barbecue. Word is Scott's trying to sue everyone he thinks has wronged him. You, his landlord, probably the weather service for not predicting sunshine. Can't sue someone for telling the truth. You can try, especially if you're desperate enough. I watched Scott gesture wildly at his lawyer, who was clearly trying to calm him down. Other people were watching too, and I could see phones coming out to record the scene. Scott Peterson's public meltdown was becoming a community event. That's when I noticed Jenny Morrison making her way through the crowd toward Scott. She moved with purpose, her face set in the kind of expression that suggested she was about to clean up someone else's mess. This should be interesting, Diana murmured. Jenny reached Scott and took his arm, speaking to him in low, urgent tones. Whatever she was saying, it wasn't working. Scott shook her off and continued his animated conversation with the lawyer, his voice carrying across the community center. I want everyone sued, he was saying. Miller, the landlord, that bitch at the bank who wouldn't extend my line of credit, all of them. The lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. Scott, you need to calm down. We can't just sue people because you're upset. Upset? I'm not upset. I'm ruined. My business is gone, my reputation is shot, and it's all because of lies and sabotage. Jenny tried again to pull him away from the crowd, But Scott was past caring about public appearances. He spotted me across the room and started walking in my direction, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. "There he is," Scott announced loudly enough for half the room to hear. "The man who destroyed my life." The community center went quiet. Even the band stopped playing, sensing that something dramatic was about to happen. All eyes turned toward me as Scott approached my booth, swaying slightly. "Scott," I said calmly, "maybe you should go home and sleep this off." "Sleep it off? Sleep it off?" He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You systematically destroyed my business, stole my girlfriend, and ruined my reputation, and you think I should sleep it off?" "I didn't steal anything. Laura made her own choice." "Bullshit. You poisoned her against me, filled her head with lies about my finances." The crowd was getting larger, people drawn by the promise of public confrontation. I could see phones recording, social media posts being composed in real time. Whatever happened next would be all over Facebook within minutes. "The only lies were the ones you told her," I said, "about your income, your investments, your ability to take care of her and my daughters." "Your daughters?" Scott's voice cracked. "Those girls deserve better than a grease monkey for a father. They deserve someone who can give them opportunities, culture, a real future." That's when I lost my temper. Not in an explosive way. I wasn't going to give Scott the satisfaction of seeing me lose control in public, but something cold and hard settled in my chest, and when I spoke, my voice carried across the silent room. "You're right," I said. "My daughters do deserve better. They deserve better than a broke con artist who can't pay his rent. They deserve better than a man who lies to their mother about having money while he's bouncing checks all over town. They deserve better than someone who's so desperate and pathetic that he gets drunk at a community barbecue and makes a scene in front of the whole town." Scott's face went white, then red, then white again. "You son of a bitch." He lunged at me, but I was ready. I stepped aside, and Scott stumbled into my booth, sending business cards flying and knocking over the display table. He tried to catch himself, but went down hard, landing on his hands and knees among the scattered promotional materials. The crowd gasped. Someone laughed. A dozen phones captured the moment when Scott Peterson, the smooth-talking real estate agent who'd stolen Jason Miller's wife, ended up face down in a pile of auto repair flyers. Two men from the volunteer fire department helped Scott to his feet. He was bleeding from a small cut on his forehead, and his expensive shirt was torn. He looked around at the crowd of faces, some sympathetic, some amused, most just curious, and seemed to realize what he'd done. "This isn't over," he said to me, but his voice had lost its edge. He sounded tired, defeated. "Yes, it is," I replied. "It's been over for weeks. You just didn't want to admit it." Jenny Morrison finally managed to get Scott out of the community center, half carrying him toward the parking lot, while he muttered incoherently about lawsuits and revenge. The crowd slowly dispersed, people breaking into small groups to dissect what they'd just witnessed. "Well," Diana said, helping me clean up the scattered business cards, "that was educational." "Educational?" "I learned that you're much better at public confrontations than I expected. Very calm, very controlled. You made him look like exactly what he is, a drunk, broke loser." I wasn't sure how I felt about that assessment. Part of me was satisfied that Scott had finally shown his true colors in front of the whole town, but part of me felt sorry for him. He'd lost everything, his business, his reputation, his dignity, and now he was just a broken man, lashing out at anyone within reach. "Dad?" Beth appeared at my side, looking concerned. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just some adult drama. Is that man going to hurt us?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. In all my focus on revenge and vindication, I'd forgotten that my daughters were watching this unfold. They were seeing their father publicly humiliated, their family torn apart, their world turned upside down. "No," I said, kneeling down to look her in the eye. "He's not going to hurt anyone. He's just sad and angry, and sometimes adults say stupid things when they feel that way." Like when you and Mom fight? Yeah, like when your mom and I fight. That evening, after the girls were in bed, I sat on my back porch and tried to process what had happened. Scott's public meltdown had been the final nail in the coffin of his relationship with Laura. No woman wants to be associated with a man who gets drunk at community events and picks fights with her husband. My phone buzzed with a text from Laura. "We need to talk tomorrow. About everything." I texted back, "Okay." Another message, this one from Diana. "Saw the video someone posted on Facebook. 50,000 views and counting. You're famous." I didn't respond to that one. Fame wasn't what I'd been after. I'd wanted my dignity back, my reputation restored, my side of the story told. But I was beginning to realize that revenge, even justified revenge, came with its own costs. The next morning, Laura was waiting for me in the kitchen when I came in from my garage. She looked like she hadn't slept, her eyes red-rimmed and her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "I saw the video," she said without preamble. And I'm done. With Scott, with Jenny's schemes, with all of it. I poured myself coffee and sat down across from her. "What does that mean?" "It means I want to try to save our marriage, if you'll have me." I stared at her for a long moment. This woman I'd loved for 15 years. This woman who'd betrayed me and humiliated me and nearly destroyed everything we'd built together. She looked small and vulnerable, nothing like the confident executive who'd been planning my destruction just weeks earlier. "Laura," I said gently, "I don't think we can go back." "Why not?" "I made mistakes, I know that. But we have 15 years together, 2 children, a life. That has to count for something." "It does count. But trust isn't something you can just rebuild overnight. And respect." I shook my head. "I don't know if I can ever respect you again." She started crying then, quiet tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. "I know I hurt you. I know I was selfish and stupid and cruel. But I love you, Jason. I've always loved you." "No," I said. "You loved the security I provided. You loved having a steady husband while you played with exciting men. But you didn't love me enough to be faithful, and you didn't love me enough to be honest." "That's not true, isn't it? When did you last ask me about my dreams, my goals, my hopes for the future? When did you last show interest in my work, my friends, my thoughts about anything that mattered? You turned me into a paycheck with a pulse, Laura. And when you found someone who could write bigger checks, you were ready to throw me away." She was sobbing now, her carefully constructed facade finally cracking completely. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "I know you are. And I forgive you, because holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. But forgiveness doesn't mean we can pretend this never happened." We talked for another hour, working through the practical details of our separation. Laura would move in with her parents temporarily while we figured out custody arrangements and property division. The girls would split time between us, at least until we could establish a more permanent arrangement. It was civilized, mature, and utterly heartbreaking. That afternoon I was in my garage when Jenny Morrison showed up. She looked haggard, older than her years, and there was something desperate in her eyes. "This is all your fault," she said without preamble. "Hello, Jenny. Nice to see you too. Don't be cute with me, Jason. You destroyed Scott, you destroyed Laura, and you destroyed their relationship. Are you happy now?" I set down my wrench and looked at her. "I didn't destroy anything, Jenny. I just stopped pretending not to see what was already broken. You manipulated the situation. You planned this whole thing. Did I? Or did I just refuse to play the victim while you and Laura planned to destroy me?" Her face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't." I pulled out my phone and played a snippet of the recording I'd made at the Morrison Industries picnic. Jenny's voice discussing strategy for Laura's divorce, talking about making me look unstable and dangerous. "That's illegal," she whispered. "No, it's not. You were in a public place, speaking loudly enough for anyone to hear. No expectation of privacy." Jenny stared at the phone like it was a snake. "What do you want?" "Nothing. I already have everything I need. My reputation is restored, my side of the story is told, and everyone in town knows exactly what kind of people you and Scott really are. You're not going to use that recording? I don't need to. You've already destroyed yourselves more effectively than I ever could have. She left without another word, and I went back to work on the engine I'd been rebuilding. Outside, Millbrook continued its slow dance of gossip and judgment, but I was no longer the main attraction. That honor now belonged to Scott Peterson, whose spectacular fall from grace would be talked about for years to come. 3 weeks later, I was closing up the shop when Diana stopped by with a bottle of wine and a smile. Celebrating? I asked. Scott Peterson left town today, packed up what was left of his stuff, and headed for parts unknown, probably running from creditors. Good for him. Good for everyone. The man was toxic. We sat on the porch behind my shop, drinking wine and watching the sun set over Millbrook's industrial landscape. It wasn't beautiful exactly, but it was honest. No pretense, no facades, just the reality of a working town trying to survive in a changing world. Any regrets? Diana asked. I thought about it for a moment. About Scott? Number. He made his choices, and he lived with the consequences. About Laura? I paused. Yeah, I regret that it came to this. I regret that our daughters had to see their family fall apart. I regret that 15 years of marriage ended with lawyers and custody agreements instead of love and respect. But you don't regret fighting back? No, I don't regret that. For too long, I let other people define who I was and what I was worth. I let them turn me into a joke, a victim, a sad character in their drama. When I finally stood up for myself, when I finally demanded the respect I deserved, everything changed. Diana raised her glass. To Jason Miller, who refused to stay down. To Jason Miller, I agreed, who learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be the villain in someone else's story. We drank to that, and to the future, and to the hard-won knowledge that dignity, once lost, could be reclaimed by those brave enough to fight for it. 6 months later, Laura and I were officially divorced. She'd moved to the state capital, taken a job with a larger company, and was slowly rebuilding her life. The girls spent weekends with her and weekdays with me, an arrangement that seemed to work for everyone involved. Scott Peterson had indeed left town, leaving behind a trail of unpaid debts and broken promises. The last I heard, he was selling used cars in Florida, probably charming new victims with the same smooth talk that had once fooled my wife. Jenny Morrison's marriage had survived the scandal, but her social standing in Millbrook had taken a permanent hit. The recording I'd made at the company picnic had never been released publicly, but word had gotten around about her role in orchestrating Laura's affair. She was no longer the queen bee of Millbrook society, just another middle-aged woman with too much time and too many secrets. As for me, I was doing better than I had in years. My business was thriving. Apparently, being the wronged husband in a public scandal was good for customer sympathy. I'd started dating Diana, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as we discovered we actually liked each other's company. The girls were adjusting to their new reality with the resilience of children. Beth had stopped looking at me like I was a disappointment, and Janie had never really understood what all the fuss was about anyway. They were good kids, and they deserved better than the chaos their parents had put them through. But most importantly, I'd learned something valuable about myself. I was stronger than I'd thought, smarter than people gave me credit for, and capable of fighting for what mattered to me. I'd refused to be the victim in my own story, and that had made all the difference. The town of Millbrook moved on to new scandals, new dramas, new sources of entertainment. But sometimes, late at night when I was working in my garage, I'd remember the look on Scott Peterson's face when he realized his perfect plan had fallen apart. I'd remember the moment when Laura finally saw him for what he really was. I'd remember the satisfaction of watching my enemies destroy themselves while I simply refused to back down. They'd tried to make me the villain in their story. Instead, I'd become the hero of my own. And that, I thought, was the sweetest revenge of all. The end. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.